Top 10 list of the best-selling books of all time. Welcome to our best-selling books of all time list. We can assure you if hundreds of millions of people bought the same book, it is worth reading. And not one of these 10 bestsellers have sold less than 100 million copies until 2023. Curious which books met this magic number of 100 million? Well, let's see. Number 10, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. The best-selling books of all time list starts out with the youngest book of the 10 published in 1988. The story of The Alchemist follows a young shepherd on his adventure to the Egyptian pyramids. After having a recurring dream, the protagonist is told by a fortune teller he is supposed to discover a treasure in the foreign land and to follow his destiny. Brazilian author Paulo Coelho wrote the book in only 2 weeks, and it has since become translated from Portuguese into numerous languages and has sold around 100 million copies in the past 35 years. Number 9. And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This classic by Agatha Christie is the world's best-selling mystery novel, having sold over 100 million copies to this day. Originally released in 1939, is about 10 men and women on an isolated island that are being killed one by one while the remaining characters are trying to find the murderer. While most famous for the stories of Miss Marple, this is Christie's best-selling book to date. And not only that, it is number 9 on the best-selling books of all time list as well. Originally released under the title 10 Little Plural of the N-Word, the title was later changed. The plot, however, is based on this old minstrel song from the 19th century, where it was counted down from 10 to none, referring to the murder victims of the story. Number 8. The Dream of the Red Chamber by Cao Zequin. Highly regarded as one of the biggest classics in Chinese literature, this book, published in 1791, has sold over 100 million copies. It follows the story of a stone that wants to live in the human world and is allowed to become a boy. The boy experiences love, life, and social relations in Chinese society in the mid-18th century. A very poetic masterpiece and look into Chinese culture of that period. Also the only book that is not part of Western literature that did make this list. Number 7. The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Eventually famous to later generations for his follow-up work, contrary to the movies decades later, The Hobbit was published in 1937, before Lord of the Rings. It follows the story of Bilbo Baggins, Wizard Gandalf, and 13 dwarfs on their adventures to fight orcs and trolls to reclaim the dwarves' home and the treasure from the dragon Smaug. It has sold well over 100 million copies and was a major success, and is considered a classic of children's literature. Number 6. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone by J.K. Rowling. The first novel about the young wizard Harry Potter, who is now by far more famous than real-life wizards such as Harry Houdini or David Copperfield. Mostly popular among children, the book is also loved by many grown-ups and catapulted the author J.K. Rowling from relative poverty to billionaire status. 6 extremely successful sequels followed this book, and all were made into high-grossing movies as well. But just this first book of the Harry Potter series alone has sold an incredible 120 million copies to date. Number 5. Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now placed number 5 is a little tricky, as The Lord of the Rings came out as more than one book in the mid-50s. However, the author intended the fantasy novel about the Hobbit Frodo and the Ring as one book, and it was later released as one book in 1968. Now famously made into 3 very successful movies, the book has sold 150 million units and is regarded as an absolute classic, which took Tolkien over 10 years to write and create this whole fantasy universe, now known to everyone as Middle-earth. Number 4. The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint. This book was published in 1943 in France and follows a prince who travels planets and discusses various topics, such as love, loneliness, friendship, and human nature. It is one of the most famous books for children and has sold close to 200 million copies within the last 80 years. Very impressive. Number 3. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This historical novel, by famous author Charles Dickens, tells a story set in the time of the French Revolution. It is about a French doctor and his 18-year-long imprisonment in the Bastille in Paris, and his release to live with his daughter that he never met in London. It takes place in a time of anarchy and terror, and it is Dickens's best-selling book with over 200 million copies sold to date, which is good enough to enter the top 3. Number 2. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. First published in 1845, this classic has sold an incredible 500 million copies to date. One of the most famous stories in history is about a man that was thrown in prison for a crime he did not commit and is seeking revenge against the men responsible for his tragedy. He becomes aware of hidden treasures on the island of Monte Cristo and is determined to break out to find them and use the fortune on his mission for justice as he resurfaces as the rich, powerful, and mysterious Count of Monte Cristo to avenge himself. The difference of no less than 300 million sales more is significant and clearly the biggest jump on this list. Number 1. Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes. The number 1 spot on this list is also an all-time bestseller with well over 500 million copies sold. It was written in 1605 and is at the same time the oldest book on our list as well. The story is set in Spain, where Alonso Quixano reads too many romantic books about knights and loses himself in these romanticized fantasies of chivalry. He eventually goes mad and convinces himself to be a knight-errant. He then goes on adventures completely stuck in his fantasy world of old knight tales, which makes this novel a parody of the poems and cultural background of its time. It is considered to be the book that founded Western literature, and this concludes our list of best-selling books of all time. Were you surprised by some of the numbers or titles on this list? Let us know in the comment section.